the prodigal partner.
Well, thanks for having me back, and it's good
Oh,
to
good.
be back.
Yeah,
So,
it's
the past 2 weeks have just been dealing with the passing of my mother-in-law, and I'm not I wasn't that close with her. Okay, so it wasn't like, I'm not like personally devastated by it. So I understand if you want to wish me well, but it's okay. This has been kind of 10 years in the making, and there's more relief, I think, around the fact that she's no longer in pain. So that's kind of the
yeah, well,
there's a big
it's
decompression from that. But
yeah, it is your kid's grandmother, so obviously,
yeah,
well, it impacts your whole family
right.
in a way
No, of
that's good.
course.
Yeah, yeah. You're along for the ride regardless
Yeah,
of what your
so
personal stake is in it, yeah.
yeah, so that's finally dealt with and done with, and so yeah, now I'm back, hopefully, for Sundays to come.
Alright, well, that's good. I know you've been missed. I've certainly missed you. I think that our viewers have been, missing you. Um, so yeah, the other day, not on a live stream, but just in regular conversation between the two of us, we had a lot of fun looking at the heliacal rising and setting of Venus and looking at its path in the sky. And we worked out a few things that hadn't been entirely sort of obvious to us until that point. So I thought we might, yeah, take the audience through some of what we've been talking about and looking at. And let's see, do you want to take the stage and show everyone your
Sure.
maps? Can
I
do
will
you,
try to not hog and try to be as concise as possible.
no, no,
But
no. You can
basically,
hog all you want. You've been gone
well,
for 2 weeks, man. Like,
well, basically, um, basically, if you're watching, you might have heard of the phenomenon of a planet being combust the sun, being under the beams. And when you learn astrology, that's typically ref- um, is kind of standardized as when a planet is within 15 degrees of the sun, it's too close to the sun to be visible, and thus there's something about the significations of that planet which are somehow impeded or hidden because that planet is actually obscured by the rays of the sun. So while that can work most of the time, while a planet is typically obscured when it's that close to the sun, it's not really an accurate definition of a planet being under the beams when a planet is no longer astronomically visible. And really, the the true definition of what makes a planet under the beams or not is dependent on your latitude, and it's dependent on your elevation, and it's dependent on uh, the directional position of Venus relative to the sun and which direction it moves, that tells you exactly when Venus will be invisible or visible in your location. So what's really interesting about that is we tend to view uh, when you see people refer to Venus as heliacal rising, for example, heliacal setting, they may use a date, but as we know now from looking at the spread of heliacal setting and rising dates all over the world, that there actually is quite a large variance. The earliest times that Venus can set in the world can be a month before the last time it sets. Uh, so this is kind of interesting because it means that Venus will make a heliacal setting or rising in different parts of the world before or after other parts of the world. And so it's a kind of while it's a global event, it's experienced differently depending on where you are on the planet. And so I asked the question, well, where does a Venus heliacal rising or heliacal setting happen first? In what way can we visualize a an event like this in one image? How can we see what a Venus heliacal rising or setting looks like, on planet Earth? So the only way that I was able to figure out how to depict this was basically to try to calculate it for as many places as possible and then plot it on a map. And color code it so that there would be a different color according to its date, the date of the Heliacal Rising. So that I realized this is maybe kind of hard to visualize. So I actually used, I don't know anything about coding, but I was able to use ChatGPT to give me the steps and the code that I would need to be able to make a query of the Swiss ephemeris to get the Heliacal Rising dates over an 8-year series. And I was able to get it to calculate that for as many as 400 locations. Now, obviously, this is woefully incomplete, but it does give you somewhat of an idea of the direction of Venus's heliacal phenomena. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just share my screen here. Let's do this. One sec. Live television, everyone.
Do I have to do something to?
No,
You don't
have to do anything. I will share my screen.
There we are. Yeah. I do need to do one thing.
So, what you can see here is this is Venus's heliacal setting in 2023. So where you see the lighter pale blue dots, those represent times which are earlier in Venus's heliacal setting, and the places which are colored darker are the later parts of Venus's heliacal setting. So we can see here that, for example, in Vilnius in Lithuania, Venus set on July 8th of 2023. So that was almost a month ago. Meanwhile, Venus set on August 5th in the South Pacific. Or South Atlantic, rather.
South Atlantic. That looks like St. Helena, where Napoleon spent his last days.
New Zealand, you can see here that August 6th, that's today. So Venus has finally set all over the world as of today. So I guess this is maybe kind of poetic that we are talking about this as Venus is completing its heliacal setting all over the world. So what's so interesting about this is you can see from the color coding here that the Venus heliacal setting began in the northern hemisphere and moved southward through the earth. It started north and it moved south. Now, when I look, and it took place over about a month, from early July all the way through to now, early August. Now, if we look at the heliacal rising, it's the same thing. The lighter the color is, the earlier in the process it takes, and the later in the process it is, the darker the yellow color I selected. So you can see here how the heliacal rising will actually begin in the southern hemisphere and will eventually move north. Now, again, I was only able to do about 400 locations on Earth because that's all I could find the elevation data for, along with the coordinates for those locations. So this is, incomplete, but it does give you a kind of a general idea of the trajectory of this event. Now, there could be some errors here, so I suspect that's what some of these loaners are doing. Okay. Those shouldn't probably be there. Those might be like reverse coordinates or something like that. I'd need to double check my data, but
they could be elevation issues, maybe.
Probably not extreme enough to justify these aberrations. But so these are probably issues with the data itself. But we can see that overall, the trajectory of Venus's heliacal rising will be that it moves from the southern hemisphere towards the north. So it's basically just doing the reverse of the setting. Somewhat more interesting, though, is the fact that the heliacal rising only takes about a week to complete. We can see here that it starts in, say, South Africa on August 20th, 2023, but then it'll set about a week later.
You mean
sorry, it will rise a week later in that same place we saw in Lithuania.
Yeah.
So it only takes a week for it to rise, but it took a month for it to set. So I think this kind of gives us this is kind of the first time, at least, that I've ever seen a kind of visualization of a heliacal rising and setting event. And I actually completed these maps for all 8 years of Venus heliacal risings and settings over the past 8 years, and you can access that on my Patreon, and there's a link to that on my Twitter profile. So
Fantastic.
I mean, so it's obviously there's I would want to take this to the next step. The next step would be to um get like an elevation API and cast a much wider and more granular data set of
Yeah,
locations and make the same kind of calculation. We could get a more intricate map of these heliacal events.
sure.
So that kind of brings us to what we started talking about. So now
Yeah.
that I've kind of brought you up to speed, this
Now,
is
first
where
of all,
we're at.
before we even go into this next step, which is really exciting, we're going to have a lot of fun with. Let me just say that this is huge, Watson. What you've just put together is really next level as far as astrology is concerned, because none of us are used to considering issues like, elevation or the different locations where planets rise and set, not just Venus, all the bodies, and our predecessors, are the giants whose shoulders we stand on. They were aware of these things. Like we have to catch up with whoever and however designed horoscopic astrology. This kind of information was really sort of primary in creating the system, and so we got to sort of retrace our steps and get an idea of how all this operates. And this is just really mind-blowing, really mind-blowing. Something that I've never really had the chance to no one's had the chance to visualize this until you just created this map. I'd love to look at one or two others, and then we could go into the astronomy. Do you mind showing us one of the other maps, one of the other years, just to get a similar?
Sure. Yeah.
Because
So
there are different paths. They don't always go like north to
yes.
south, and I think this is why I'm asking you to do this is to give our viewers the sense that different Venus retrogrades will rise and set in different ways. In different directions, shall I say? It's not always just north to south or what have you.
Right. Yeah, there seem to be a few different versions of heliacal risings, and this sort of led us down this path, kind
Right.
of solving this mystery of like, why are they different? So let me see if I can find you some of the ones I've worked on. So for example, okay, I think I'm ready to share. So this is the heliacal setting of the 2017 Venus retrograde, the 2017 Red 1 Venus retrograde. This is the heliacal setting. So we can see that it's another one that it's one of these ones that starts south and moves north. So this is the opposite of the one that we are currently experiencing, which started north and moved south. Now, the weird part is when you get to the heliacal rising. So when Venus rose heliacally, during the Venus retrograde in Aries of 2017, the so-called Red 1 Venus interval, we can see that it started in the center of the world and then spread outward towards the poles as time goes on. So it spreads from the center towards the extremities.
And we were very puzzled by this at first.
Right, like how can that happen? So we have some which move from north to south, other ones which move south to north, and then we have these opening
Right.
heliacal risings. But there's another kind which is pretty baffling. Let me see if I can find one. Oh, yes. So in this case, we have the reverse. So this is the
Right.
heliacal setting exterior conjunction that occurred. This is the blue four, the beginning of the blue four, technically,
2018
of
or early
early
2018.
early 2018. Would have
Okay.
begun late 2017 and went into
Right.
2018. And we can see that actually started towards the extremities and then moved inward towards the center.
Amazing.
So we have some Venus events which start at the poles and go outward, and then we have ones which start at the poles and move inward. So we have opening ones and closing ones,
As well
and
as
we have
ones that just go north south or south north.
south north.
So there's all these
So
different variants of
so
how these work.
well, and the significance of this is that it means that certain parts of the world Venus will be visible first in or last in. And so just depending on where you are in the world, that's going to sort of determine something about the about when that planet becomes visible. Now, I assume there is some astrological significance to this. This is obviously this is kind of the baby step, the very first thing that anyone would have to figure out before investigating the astrological significance of this is just mapping out the categories and classes of heliacal phenomena for each planet. So we had to ask the question, well, what determines the shape or the direction or the movement or type of Venus heliacal phenomena? So we started looking at that with Nick software, and
I guess
we
this
came
is
to some
where
interesting conclusions.
I share the screen,
Sure.
and right. So I'm going to have to do what I did last time. Orientation to the ecliptic. No. Not this stuff again. Hold on a second.
Yeah, this is a really dense piece of software.
Yeah.
You can see all the options here. This looks
Right.
tricky.
All right. Here we are. And so I've got it at the center, and I'm going to choose the celestial path. And let me just go back a couple of months. Actually, I'm going to have to. It's one flaw with this is I always have to turn the celestial path on and off when I reset it. That's an extra couple of clicks, but here we are. We're ready to go. So I'm starting at May 6th of 2023. I'm just going to show them this Venus retrograde loop. And then we'll look at some of the others and we'll get an idea of the variance. Oh, wait, what's going on here? What did I just do? Maybe it's this. Nope. Okay, what? All right, hold on. Let me recalibrate. I don't know
what is centered, but we want the path of.
Yeah. Oh God.
So while you're figuring that out, I just want to remind everyone that remember when I showed you the heliacal setting map for 2023, Venus started in the north and moved south. So on Nick software, you can see there that Venus is currently, well, once we get back to it, we'll see exactly.
Yeah, I'm toying with it now. You just keep talking while I do this.
So on Earth, the heliacal setting starts in the northern hemisphere and moves down. So that's what I want you to keep in mind when you look at the animation on Nick software, because you'll see that Venus similarly moves southward in its position as it as it approaches the sun. So we can see that there really is there's a very literal
All right.
connection.
I do have it fixed, so I'll set it up in a minute.
There's a very literal connection, as above, so below, that Venus's declination essentially is what determines partly the direction of a given Venus heliacal event. And we'll see that as soon as Nick shows his software. So it makes it gives us kind of the astronomical understanding of like, well, why does the heliacal rising heliacal setting, move southward? Well, because Venus itself is moving southward as we get to that period of July 6th through till August.
So here you can see it's June, and now it's starting to go retrograde.
Setting.
Yeah, there we are.
And set, and then rise.
And then you can see what we want everyone to see is the shape of that loop, right? This will become relevant. Now this is
went from north to south.
Yeah, it was north, it went south and did the loop, and then it came up and went north again. So it's a sort of southward loop from the north. And also this is the ecliptic meridian. Well, this is the ecliptic, but this is where we get the equinoctial point. This is Venus heading towards Libra at this point on November 2nd. And so when it gets to this line, it means it's going to be at 0 degrees of Libra. And conversely, there's another line on the other side for 0 degrees of Aries. So just keep in mind this meridian.
That's the path of the
of the equinoctial points of 0 Aries, 0 Libra.
Yeah.
Got it? Okay.
Yeah.
So which Venus retrograde shall I go to now? The 2017, the one that
sure, yeah, because then we can kind of go through the 5 ones. We just saw 5.
Right. We just looked at red 5. Now we're going to look at red 1, and this is the one that we were showing where the rising the heliacal rising happens from the equator and then goes outward. Okay. Maybe I'll just make it a bit slower. Maybe I'll also center on Venus again. Sorry. All right. Okay, so it's November of 2016. I'm just starting it a bit earlier so we get a sense of the motion. It's in a black 2 interval, and now it's going to move into a red 1 interval, and so it's gone retrograde. And you see it's going to cross 0 Aries right there as it loops. It's looped from south to north, and it's sort of wrapped itself around in its loop around the equinoctial point, which again, this is 0 Aries, this line, just like the other one was 0 Libra. And this is why, and Patrick, what did we discover with this? Or shall we look at some others before we explain it?
Well, basically, the shape of the loop is dependent on the position of the retrograde and its relationship to the heliocentric node of Venus. So Venus's north node and south node span across, I believe it's somewhere in the middle of Gemini and Sagittarius.
Yeah.
So the closer a Venus retrograde occurs to Gemini and Sagittarius, the more the loop will look like an S. And the closer it is to being square its heliocentric nodes, the more the nodes, or rather the more that these loops
are sort of are like symmetrically round.
Yeah, sort of. Yeah. Kind of more ideal or more
proper loops. Yeah,
proper loops. And and then the in between points, those retrogrades tend to have progressively more squished loops until eventually, but they become S's at the north and south. So it's really so part of the reason how this fits into Venus's heliacal phenomena is not only does the direction of a Venus heliacal setting or rising somewhat depend on its declination, but that in itself is contingent upon the type of loop that occurs in a given Venus retrograde, which it's in itself is related to Venus and its relationship to its heliocentric node, which determines the shape of that loop and thus the direction it goes and thus how it can be seen on Earth and where on Earth it's visible.
So this is the red 2 now. This is going to be one of those sort of squished ones. This is the red 2, the Venus retrograde in Scorpio that goes to late Libra. So you see, it won't go all the way back to the equinoctial point, but this is what we mean by a sort of S or Z shape or Z shape for you Americans. And, you know, you can see the loop is really sort of squashed, and it's almost like a Zorro Z or something.
Mm-hmm. But if you look at the red 3, if you look at the red 3, which is a Venus retrograde in Gemini from 2004 2012, that was a very special one because that was when Venus itself actually made essentially like an eclipse of the sun. The astronomical term they use is a transit of the, a Venus transit of the sun, which to astrologers doesn't seem that special because we just use the transit for like every kind of movement that a planet makes. But
sure, but we're also the people who call the sun and moon planets. So
fair enough, yeah. So Venus eclipses the sun here.
There we go, and this is an S shape.
And you get that ideal S shape in the loop
because it's actually crossing the node.
Yes, and I believe the one in Gemini must be the south node because Venus crosses south of the sun's path, whereas the one in Sagittarius is the north node, where Venus will make this exact same shape, but it will go from south to north instead of the reverse.
To show that, I would have to show an older red 2 back when it used to go retrograde in Sagittarius. Maybe I'll show folks that. Let's time travel to 1874, the year Winston Churchill was born. He was born close to the transit of Venus. All right. And so this is 1874. We're going to be going into the red 2 Venus retrograde, but these were the days when it happened in Sagittarius. So we're going to see, I showed you the 2018 red 2, and it was much more of a sort of squashed loop in Scorpio. But
this one should be.
This one is more of a Z or S shape, but you can see this one goes from south to north as opposed to the one in Gemini, which went the other way around.
Now, so in theory, the shape and direction of the loop should be important to interpreting the nature of the Venus retrograde, but it's important to remember that while they're each kind of unique, they're all following this same sort of pattern of being more S-like like this at the nodes, which are Gemini and Sag, and then having sort of more ideal loops in Pisces and Virgo, while the loops in between those areas of the zodiac are kind of more squished. So that go ahead.
Well, what I wanted to suggest, because there was something else about the 2017. Now that we've explained the different shapes of the loops, but I wanted to come back to the point. I'm just going to do this one over again, this red 1 again, because I want to get back to the point of these different paths of the heliacal risings and why some of them emanate from the equator and go outward. And it has to do with this. You see Venus crossing the equinoctial point like that. These two crossings. This is where. Well, help me explain this, Patrick. Shall we go back to the map?
This is something that I wasn't entirely clear on. I don't know entirely that it has something to do with the the equinox or not. This is the part that I haven't really been able to quite figure out. I mean, that may very well be important, but I'm not sure though, because I think there are a couple of other heliacal risings or settings that didn't necessarily take place at the equinoxes, but sort of had that same either opening or closing effect. That was kind of the last question mark I still had about that.
Well, okay, we went over it quite a bit, though. We went through quite a few examples, and it seemed to become more and more definitive that it was the case. I
I
mean, it's fine if
I
you're
don't
not
remember.
signed on. Oh, okay, you don't remember that?
I don't really remember. I just remember still being a little confused by that. I mean, it may very well be important. I'm not. I can't.
Well,
I
let's
can't
explore it.
quite
Let's explore
define
it
it.
here. Let's explore it here and now, shall we?
Okay, sure,
Unless
fair enough.
unless you want to go in a different direction.
No, no,
So
we can look at it. So for example, um, the
we'll go to the map of the red one and show us some dates where when Venus is making its heliacal rising from the equator, the early
um
risings.
we looked at the red one. Why don't we look at the
Okay,
um
anything you like.
sure. Why don't we take a look at the 2018 Black 3? That was
Okay,
when Venus was disappearing into an exterior conjunction. Sorry, this is actually the rising. So this is when Venus was rising out of an exterior conjunction with the sun in early 2018.
okay.
So this is one which here I'll show the map so we understand what I'm kind of talking about here. So in March of 2018, Venus rose out of the beams of an external conjunction closer to the center of the Earth, and then we
Okay.
see that it began that this is where it first appeared, and then it appeared later in the northern and more extreme southern latitudes. So we can see this is one which kind of started in the center
So
and
give me
moved
one of
out.
the earliest rising dates there around this.
One of the earliest rising dates was like March 1st.
Okay, so March 1st. All right. So I am going to, yeah, unshare you and then share my screen. We'll just have to go back and forth sharing my screen, your screen as we
Yeah.
go from map to, but it's worth it. This is so interesting. Okay, so right now I'm at January 9th. I need to go to what date was it? March 2nd?
March 1st
March 1st? Okay,
of 2018.
so I'm just going to advance this till we get to March 1st. All right, see, it's headed for the equinoctial point, and I've just crossed it. If I just sort of go back. Okay, so Venus is, it's March 6th, it's on the equinoctial.
Yeah.
March 1st, I mean, it is very close though.
I mean, it may just be that it is so close to the ecliptic generally at that point, rather than that it's at an equinox.
You think?
I mean, because I guess I could try to
It's,
find another example of a
yeah, I mean,
an opening or closing one that
because
isn't
if
by.
I keep going, yeah, look, it eventually sort of crosses the ecliptic there
I'm
in
trying to
April.
understand the geometry of that,
Yeah.
the astronomy of that. That's a little tricky. Okay, how about let's see. How about okay, this one is kind of interesting. The heliacal. So this is kind of another anomalous one in some ways. Let me share here so you can see what I'm looking at. So this is the heliacal setting of Venus going into the red 4 Venus retrograde in Capricorn that just happened in late 2021 / early 2022. Now I've actually highlight the dates. You can see like the earliest dates are at the more extreme northern and southern latitudes, and that it gradually moves in over as the days pass, and then finally some of the last places that is visible are in, strangely, they kind of cluster in the kind of Indian, on the Indian continent and the Middle East. So we can see that kind of, this sort of gives you a little bit of an idea of how it happens over time.
That is sort of curious. I'm trying to imagine, like I was wondering if it was elevation, but northern India's got the Himalayas and it's still like
The
rising.
lost.
Yeah.
I mean,
So,
I think
so that's puzzling me. Like when I was looking,
yeah.
What interested, when I was looking at the US map, I was thinking, oh, I can maybe get a sense of the elevation there, like where the Rockies cut through, and you would have a different thing going through there. But then I'm looking at the Himalayas in India, and I'm like, no, this isn't. It's not as straightforward as I'm trying to make it.
One of the reasons that there's so many locations in the US on the map is because I wanted to. I got the highest and lowest places in each state, as well as like the capital of that state.
Okay.
I wanted to do that for the whole world. I wanted to try to find the highest and lowest places, the highest and the places of greatest and least elevation in each country, but it just ended up being kind of unwieldy, and I couldn't really find it all. So even though elevation is a factor on the exact day, it seems like latitude is still the most important factor, because that seems to be what the pattern follows most. It doesn't seem to only hit the lowest or highest places first or last. It always seems to be it seems to follow latitude more so than other factors.
That's pretty clear, but you do see it getting mixed up, and I think that's probably where elevation comes into play, or at least that's what I thought. But it's just like, not so. Yeah,
like I think it's sort of like how the planets don't move very far in the course of one day, but where they are, in the houses, that will change a lot over the course of a given day. And I kind of feel like there's the same thing with the Heliacal Risings, that your latitude is a more general determinant of when a Venus heliacal event or any heliacal phenomenon will happen, but then your exact elevation within that place might tell you whether or not you're a day off or so from another place fairly close to you. So I think that's the relationship here. I mean, I'm sure, like, if any astronomer was watching this, maybe they're just like face palming, over this whole thing, going, "Look at these astrologers not getting this basic thing." Could we look at your software for that heliacal setting for Red 4 in 2021, 2022? So like earliest dates are like December 28th. That's when Venus started setting, and then it was fully set by January 1st. So you can see it was just over a couple of days that it took for Venus to set. So this is actually a really quick setting. So I think that's probably another factor, or another way to classify these, is that there are some which are really short.
There's long and short ascension, right? The sun's long and short ascension, and that can they don't rise and set in the same sort of. Some of them are more sort of perpendicular to the horizon, and some are more angular. Okay, so here we are. I'm starting it at September of 2021.
So Venus is south, and then by the time we get to late,
so this is like a real mutated Z, or kind of a very squashed loop.
So the reason why the reason why Venus's disappearance would have been much shorter than over this time frame had to do with the fact that it happened right around the, like, you can see how the main loop there, like if you take it back to like December 29th.
Whoops.
So December 28th. This is when it starts disappearing in the
Right. Well, you
in the
can see it's
on the
quite close to,
poles,
right. It's quite close to the sun at that point.
and then as the days continue, it starts disappearing across the entire, towards the center of the world.
Yeah. Okay, so starting from here, it's at this point, and so yeah, it was just before the conjunction, so you can see why it would come out then.
So yeah, I'm still not entirely sure. I don't know that it has to do with the equinox. I mean, I suppose it could. But
Yeah, it kept seeming to sort of line up when whatever we were looking at the other day.
I think we just happened to be looking at examples where Venus just happened to
Maybe.
be
Yeah,
there.
maybe.
I'm not
Maybe.
sure that it. I don't know if that's the organizing principle, because, like I say, yeah, we have this example where it's a spreader. It's an
Yeah,
opening
no.
one.
Yeah.
Rather, no, this is a closing one. This is a closing one that didn't happen close to an equinox or a solstice.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it has something to do with the. It must just have something to do with the shape and direction of the loop. But in any case, one of the things that was, at least I think, fairly compelling for me was just that Venus's declination mirrors exactly where on Earth it happens, because all declination is just measuring how far north or south a planet is of the celestial equator, which is just Earth's equator.
Yeah. Projected into space. Yeah.
Yeah. So when Venus is north in declination, then guess what? It's going to be north
Of the equator.
of the equator that Venus is going to be able to be seen. And so that was kind of I mean, it makes sense. It's very straightforward, but it's something, you sort of appreciate in a new way, and you finally realize, like, well, of course,
Yeah.
that's why Venus would be visible in this part of the world versus this. And while we're focusing on Venus, all of these same kinds of analysis could be applied to Mars's appearances and disappearances, or Jupiter's and Saturn's,
Yeah.
and the moons and Mercury's.
This is critical. This is critical. I can't believe we've been operating all this time without having this incorporated into our astrology.
Right. So, I mean, obviously there's a lot more work to do, and I would probably need some, like, I don't know, coding help, or someone more sophisticated with this kind of stuff could maybe give a helping hand or something. But what we really need is a more granular data set of locations with their elevation. And this data is out there. I think we have a satellite. I think NASA has a satellite that has a really complete data set of elevation. So ideally, I'd like to cover at least every degree of latitude and longitude on the Earth, which is 360 times 360. So that would be a lot of locations to calculate for, but that would give us a really granular detail. Oh, someone asked me what code I'm using. I guess it's what is it?
This is how little we know.
JavaScript, maybe.
ChatGPT's been guiding him. He's
Yeah,
been coding with no knowledge of coding.
It tells me the thing, and I just do the thing, and somehow it worked. Yeah, so I think maybe it was JavaScript. But the
Welcome to the
yeah,
new
so what we
world,
need is
folks.
we need a more complete data set of locations, and then we could generate more accurate maps of this. And ideally, I'd like to make it so it doesn't, don't have these corny little markers. I'd like it so it just sort of colors in, more of a, sort of gradient type of style to
Right,
show
right.
us a
Instead
sort
of
of more
these, yeah,
clean
yeah.
version of the map. And I'd like to apply this to all of the planets. And I think, all right, so I think people are probably thinking like, okay, well, why is this significant? Why should we care about this? And I think, well, one, it's looking at the heliacal phenomena of the planet, considering whether a planet is combust or not, is something that you see a lot in traditional literature. And that's something that it's such a basic condition about it, whether is a planet visible or not. And all of the attendant, even if people disagree about whether it's a good thing or a bad thing for a planet to be under the beams, I think we can at least agree that we should at least be able to know for sure whether it is actually visible or not. um but I, just anecdotally, I have noticed that these times where a given planet emerges from the beams or sets into the beams of the sun do seem to be kind of significant. So, for example, um, back in 2022, I forget exactly what his name. What was the Supreme Court judge that resigned last year to make way for Ketanji Brown Jackson?
Was it Kennedy?
Was it Kennedy,
I'm
or was it?
I'll look it up. Wiki will always tell you whose seat they took over. Breyer. It was Stephen
Breyer, yeah,
Breyer.
that's right.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
Stephen Breyer announced his resignation right around the time that Jupiter set into the beams of the sun. And then Ketanji Brown Jackson was announced as the new as the nominee when Jupiter was conjunct the sun. And then when Jupiter rose out of the beams of the sun, that was the Senate hearing, where eventually she was confirmed. And of course, Jupiter is the planet of justices, right? Or at least one way of looking at them. And I thought that was such an interesting bit of symbolism, because oftentimes a planet moving into the beams of the sun is seen to represent kind of the ending of that planet's cycle, or the ending of a given story, because it's receding from visibility, it's moving towards its renewal at the point of this at the point of its conjunction with the sun. So a justice retiring, announcing they're going to go away as Jupiter is moving into the beams of the sun, I think is quite interesting. And then the fact that the new Jupiter, the replacement, was announced close to the conjunction with the sun itself, and then that they actually emerged in some official capacity around the time of the Jupiter emergence from the beams of the sun. I think that that really neatly captures, I feel like, the meaning of conjunctions with the sun, which is simply, these are kind of points of renewal. And sometimes these are more extreme than others, but still, there seems to be something important that each planet undergoes as it goes through its conjunction with the sun. In the same way that retrogrades are about a planet sort of acting in a more sort of extroverted way, I think, because oftentimes those are when planets are making their most extreme movements in the sky, going backward. For the exterior planets is when they're most visible. So the planets being at their least visible, conjunct the sun, it sort of has an attending sort of astrological significance. And I think the question of whether it's good or bad is also kind of an open question.
Yeah, that's so subjective.
What do you think about planets which are conjunct the sun generally? Do you find them to be uh, is that a good thing for someone to have, or a bad thing?
Natally,
Yeah.
natally, yeah. The strongest one is Sun Mars. That doesn't seem to hurt. The others, there's that old sort of idea that the sun sort of takes up their significations until the planet becomes a time lord. So let's say you have Venus close by, and it's swallowed up by the sun, but then you have those times when Venus is a time lord, and suddenly that Venus sort of comes alive, if you will. That it doesn't matter that it's sort of under the beams. And to some degree, I've seen that play out. Like using perfection. Annual perfections and things like that. Like, suddenly an under the beams Venus does seem to come alive in Libra perfection years or Taurus perfection years or things like that. So there is a subtlety involved there, but it is kind of a little out of reach still.
Yeah, there are certain charts which have really challenged my idea of it being completely bad. For example, that I think one of the charts that kind of broke me in a way was Michael Phelps, the Olympic swimmer.
Oh, yeah.
He was born with the Sun conjunct Mars in Cancer, to which to a tropical astrologer, wouldn't
Right,
seem
that
to
should
be
be
like a great aspect to have for like being a champion, like not just I mean, literally one of the most awarded, Olympians ever, the champ of all champs in swimming. And what's actually really fascinating about that as well is I think he first qualified for the Olympics just before he turned 15, which means that
the
he
Mars
had his
return.
Sun
Yeah,
Mars return,
yeah.
at the time that he really, kind of ascended into this higher level of competitiveness. And so I think it works. I mean, it hasn't seemed to have hurt him, although a friend pointed out to me that I guess Michael Phelps has some sort of heart condition that weirdly has helped him in being able to be a superior swimmer, which is interesting because the sun often represents the heart in a horoscope, and so to have Mars conjunct the sun, this malefic,
That's peculiar.
yeah,
I didn't, I don't follow swimming.
sure,
The most I know about Phelps is that he was caught, with a bong and some picture, and that became this big
yeah, I don't know,
cult
yeah,
celeb. But
he's got
yeah,
other parts of his chart, but I think obviously, that the sun Mars thing seems to be important for his
but
swimming.
that's
I think,
that's interesting that the whole thing about the heart, a heart defect that somehow serves to
yeah,
help him as a swimmer is really, that's an interesting concept.
right. So I think that might be a way that Sun Mars conjunction could make sense in some respect, that there is something which kind of has harmed him, but it's also kind of provided him with this this super skill, in a way that he's really, the sun took up the significations of the planet that it was conjunct. So it's not so much that he has a Mars which is harming the sun as much as a sun which is like harnessing the power of
Of
Mars and
Mars. Yeah,
driving him to be able to compete
yeah.
and achieve highly, and win.
Yeah, I've found that the Mars with the sun seems to be a winner. At least as far as the matters of that house, are concerned. What really excites me about what you've done with this map, is, we've had, when we got into Hellenistic astrology and we were introduced to the concept of phasis, the idea of planets making an appearance that speaks. And they're making a phasis when they're close to a station, within about a week or so of a station. But then the other time that they're considered to be making a phasis is when they're within a week of making a heliacal rising or setting. And 24 years ago, when I'm learning this material from Schmidt, the only information we had to go on was, we could use this sort of rough 15-degree from the sun, arbitrary measurement that a planet needed to be in order for it to be making a heliacal rising or setting. But that's obviously like just so, wrong-headed. I mean, we didn't, that was, we knew even then that this was a really imperfect way to measure this, but we really had no idea of how to do it any better at the time. So this is really, I mean, what you've achieved here is something that really, I think, can make, it's a really important cornerstone for making, fleshing out Hellenistic astrology, at the very least, if not, every branch forthwith. But it really, this is in effect, we haven't been doing it properly without this like really important component, without this really important understanding.
Well, and we could have done this before. The Swiss ephemeris always had this functionality, but it just no one was asking that question or making the tool that would be necessary to look at it. The only person who really did, I believe, was Ruben, who I think is the author of this piece of software that I'd been using prior to my experiments with ChatGPT and creating the software. He made this program called PLS, Planetary, Lunar, and Stellar Visibility.
Right.
And you can actually still access it on alcyone.de, I believe.
Okay.
That's
Yeah.
ALCYONE.de. And it's a very ancient piece of software, but it still does a pretty good job of being able to give you the precise heliacal rising and setting dates for a given location. The only problem with it is that it can be a little buggy, because it was made in like 2006 and hasn't been updated since then. And it you can only calculate for one place at a time. And in order to get a global view of this phenomenon, you would have to use that program and
Thousands of times.
thousands and thousands and thousands of times to get each date and meticulously copy it down, and it's just not feasible.
Yeah.
It's just too tedious. And so that's why being able to generate a lot of them all at once was something that hadn't been done before.
I'm glad you reminded me about that. I'd forgotten about his software. I mean, indeed, it is ancient, but yeah, it's a bit wrong of me to say that we didn't, until you did this, that we had no means. But I think, but
it was still kind of impossible, even at that point.
Kind of impossible.
Yeah.
What obviously, I mean, we're still not at the point we really need to be at, is where we have this all integrated into one astrology software or one astrology app, where we can do what you're doing with the maps, what I'm doing with the astronomy software, as well as all the other bells and whistles that we expect from an astrology software.
Right. And, I mean, I would love to, if we had this level of data, because we have all of the other things that are really important. Like we've mapped out all of those things, but like, interestingly, the heliacal phenomena is something that we have not actually mapped out. And there hasn't really been an efficient way to do that, at least, until so more recently.
Yeah.
And, when we finally have that kind of data, I think, about a planet, I think some really interesting observations could come out of that if we were able to compare it against certain databases. I mean, like, something I've wanted to look at for ages is like get a database of like the dates of conflicts and just throw that against the wall with every major sort of planetary cycle you can think of, and basically ask AI what cycle best explains this data, and have it be able to find these things that that we wouldn't necessarily be able to notice by ourselves, but it could. And I think that what you've done so far with like Mars and Venus retrograde cycles is so it's such a key part of this puzzle.
It's moving us towards what you're doing, though. So it's it still needs more fleshing out. And this is exactly the fleshing out that material needs. I mean, I can't imagine how much more this is gonna
right. I mean, I think someone there's been a lot of interesting comments. Someone said, look at the evil AI overlords coming through the new asteroid resources instead of destroying us. I do tend to, maybe very naively, be little more of an optimist about what's possible with AI. I know bad stuff is possible as well, but
yeah, I mean, look, the worst thing AI can do is, I mean, it's created by us, so we could teach it to be, nationalistic, religious, xenophobic, all the stuff that we're already sort of juggling between ourselves. Um, if it goes wrong, it's because we infect it with our humanness,
Maybe,
not the
yeah.
other way around.
I tend to be a little more optimistic. I mean, the benefits that it could give to astrological research, I think, are hard to overstate, or rather hard to overstate. It's what will be possible and what is currently possible is kind of astonishing. So, and the fact that you can use AI to pursue research projects like this, like the fact that I've been able to do this much has given me thoughts about what I could do with this next. And
not even be aware of what coding you're doing.
I,
I don't know. I'm
I
doing what
think
it.
it's JavaScript. I don't know, it's hard. I don't really understand it. I took a computer science course in college, and I I did it purely, out of interest, and I was able to keep up, for the first couple of months, but eventually I, barely survived. I think my final exam, that was one of my most shameful, experiences as a student. I think I
Well,
got out of there with I think it was my lowest grade that I got in my whole time in
you
college. I
should
got
get
like
an
a B
honorary
plus.
degree for what you've just achieved.
Yeah, no, that's really hilarious. But yeah, I got a D
Look,
plus in computer science. I did
look,
not
dude,
do well in
my
my
computer science
JavaScript
my
coding
computer science
course.
education was high school 1985. So just imagine what we were
Yeah.
being taught at that point. So yeah, no, I think definitely when it comes to astrology, where we have to incorporate all these different highly technical methods of calculation and measurement, then it really helps to have a big brain like that to use, help us
Yeah.
develop. We'll develop faster and more thoroughly, and less chance of making mistakes. And that's the big thing to me, this astrology mystery. We got a planet full of people who are already, we're already destroying ourselves. So I'm really not, either AI helps us not do that anymore, or it accelerates it. But I'm not too worried. Um,
Yeah, it's sometimes when it comes to my software projects with AI, I feel like I'm reminded of that speech by Jeff Goldblum in Jurassic Park, where he says, the problem with what you're doing is you didn't have the discipline to attain it. I didn't, because I don't really know exactly what I'm doing with coding. I just know enough to like be dangerous now.
right, right.
I think I could be prone to making some mistakes, but I think um for these little sort of homebrew operations, I think it's fine for my purposes. I'm not trying to make like $1 million here. I
Although
just
that would
want
be
to
nice.
I mean, I'm not going to turn that down,
Oh
but
shit,
I mean,
Patrick, I was just about to offer you $1 million, but oh well, that's fine.
but the main thing I'm interested in here is, I want to understand how the Venus, I want to understand all the heliacal phenomena. I really want to understand how that works. I think there is something really important about a planet disappearing from view and reappearing, and having that show up in some way in the world. There's something about that planet which disappears and reappears. Uh, and different people are going to use different orbs. Some people use 15, other people use 7.5, or 1 degree for Kazemi, or half a degree. I like that the official orb for NASA, from NASA, for combustion is, I think it's about 3 degrees, because when Mars, we actually lost contact with the rovers that we had on Mars, because because Mars was reaching conjunction with the sun, the
Right,
exterior
right.
conjunction.
But they were using 3 degrees. I mean, it makes sense. The sun is
Well,
big,
that
right? I
was
mean,
when we lost contact, was when it came within about 3 degrees. And so we had to wait until Mars had passed further away from the sun before we're able to communicate with the rover there. So yeah, the NASA's orb for combustion apparently is 3 degrees.
Okay.
Um,
All right.
but I think, isn't that interesting though? That there is that sort of literal physical, astrophysical sort of component there
Yeah.
of the planet really being obscured by the sun, and there being real world effects, because of that.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm dying to try this out with all the planets. Like I'm dying to see what the heliacal rising and setting of Mars is like and what sort of patterns it makes and
Yeah,
so on and so forth.
right. I mean, I think we might have extrapolated some general principles from, what doing this kind of experiment with Venus. I mean, we haven't cracked it all yet, but I imagine
No.
that we know that the shape of the loops is related to the heliocentric node for that planet. So for Venus, that means its relationship to Gemini and Sagittarius influences the shape of the loop. For Mercury, that's going to be Taurus and Scorpio. For Mars, I believe it's
Oh God, I used to know this.
is it Aquarius? It's Aquarius and Leo, I believe, is the. Oh, no, maybe not.
I used to know this ages
The
ago.
heliocentric node of Mars is.
I'm trying to find it.
We should have a prize for anyone who knows the answer to this question.
Why can't I find it?
Or is it Taurus? Maybe it's Taurus and Scorpio, because Leo and Aquarius, I think, is square. Taurus, Scorpio. Oh yeah, Mars 19 Taurus is the north node of Scorpio. Okay. I mean of Mars rather.
Right.
Someone said ask ChatGPT, and it doesn't always know what you want it to know. Someone said, I work as a database administrator building systems. I can help you guys with your project if you would like. You have my email address. Okay, well, cool. Thank you very much. That's an awesome offer. That's really exciting. Yeah. All right. Well, we'll be in touch then. Fortuna.
Yes. As we proceed, yeah. There's so this was a mind-blowing conversation we had, and I'm glad we've shared it with people.
So one of the other things we wanted to talk about today is when I was preparing for talking about Venus retrograde through the 12 houses, one of the examples I really wanted to use was Paul Rubens, because we'll get
right.
to him.
No, I thought of the same thing too. I know,
but we don't have an ascendant for him.
No.
So I couldn't really use it as an example of Venus going through a house, because I wasn't exactly sure which house Venus is going retrograde through. But he was a really good example of Venus retrograde, especially Venus retrogrades in Leo. So you're right. So I really regret not mentioning him, at least somewhat, but because obviously if you've been paying attention for the past week, unfortunately he passed away from cancer, and so there's been a lot of outpouring of fond memories and celebration of his work and his legacy as a comedic actor. And
genius.
I really wish I'd said something, because it would have looked I mean, I wouldn't have made the prediction that he was going to die, but I was going to make a prediction that he should be doing something.
He might come up in the news again.
Yeah, he might be a big deal again, and he did, but for unfortunate reason.
Yeah, no, I was thinking the same thing, because I was well aware. I mean, I've been studying him from the beginning, even though we don't have a birth time. And yeah, his famous arrest in 1991 when he was caught in a porn theater doing the thing that people do in porn
Anyone would
theaters.
do in a porn theater.
like you know, like but he
Waxing
was
the Buick,
right.
flogging the dolphin,
Right.
strangling the one-eyed
Okay,
mushroom.
yeah,
All
we get
right.
it. We know. um yeah, he was doing that and he was arrested and it
Spanking the
was
peewee.
okay. All right. You put a lot of thought into this, sir.
I got a few more in the chamber.
Yeah, I bet you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, thanks, man. Thanks.
Yeah. And sorry, I threw you off.
Yeah, he was.
Should we look at his chart? Can we bring it up and take a look at some of these transits?
When he was arrested in 1991.
Yeah, it was July 26th, 1991.
Right.
I looked at a couple of the dates before we met just to make sure that we had them.
Yeah, so here we are. I've got in the old database Paul Rubens. Is it Paul Rubens or Pee Wee Herman? I'll just do this search. So this was the arrest in 1991, July 26th, in Sarasota, Florida. And Venus, natally, he's a blue 3.
Blue 3. Yeah, the last to Venus retrograde. Sorry, the last Sun Venus conjunction to occur prior to birth was the one in early Cancer, I believe.
Yeah.
It now happens in Gemini, but at that time.
Yeah. I'm also a blue 3. He's 16 years older than me, so I'm also a blue 3. And when he was arrested, it was 5 days before Venus went retrograde in Virgo.
So it was making a phasis.
Yes, it was making a phasis. Exactly. That's the other way we know what a phasis is. That's again, going back to what you've just done with these maps, we can have a much better idea of the other way planets make a phasis, which is by heliacal setting or rising. So this is him in 1991 when he was arrested for indecent exposure. And then there was another arrest that was also during a Venus retrograde. These charges were dropped. It was a suspicion of kiddie porn, but or should I say prawn, because we're online.
Sure. It was,
but it wasn't what you think.
The police kind of screwed up. They combined the evidence against some other person into charges against him. And he'd bought a huge collection of vintage erotica, and he was looking for male physique type stuff. He wasn't asking or looking for children. So it was really
the charges were dropped, and it wasn't. I mean, it looks bad, but nonetheless, bad, it did happen during a Venus retrograde.
So we have two so another interesting kind of Venus retrograde story for Paul Rubens is he was arrested 8 years earlier in 1983.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, now I wasn't able to find the date, but I bet you anything it happened in August.
July.
Because that having a Venus, into that. Yeah, there was a Venus retrograde in Leo in 1983.
Yeah,
and we couldn't find the exact date of the arrest, but there was another Venus retrograde in that same time frame. And it was, let's see, I don't remember exactly what the charges were. It wasn't something terribly serious. I think it was. I'm just checking. Oh, it was just for possession of marijuana. Although he'd also been arrested earlier for loitering and prowling near an adult theater. So, and that was in 1971. I'm not sure exactly what that was about, with related to Venus. But we can see that, at least from what was public information, he has these two major arrests occurring during these important Venus phases, which is kind of remarkable just because Venus retrogrades are the rarest at the
Yeah.
retrogrades. And
Yeah. Well, that's why they always spoke to me, because when you start seeing a bunch of them appear in a person's timeline, like I kept seeing over and over and over again when I was studying biographies, it's just like, geez, these don't happen very often. It's really weird that they just that
right,
you can just find a lot of them in a given subject,
right.
and he's just he's yet another example of someone whose life seems to unfold that way,
Now
into
the
that pattern.
Venus, yeah, right. Now the Venus retrograde that occurred in 1991, that one was conjunct Mars,
Yeah.
and that was one that obviously was like extremely difficult for him because he was, at that
Oh, he
time,
lost everything.
yeah, I mean that was brutal. That was a really, really brutal experience, and it really seems very unfair, to us now. Um,
Oh, geez,
it
yeah.
was
He's a pioneer. He's a
complete
pioneer.
it was completely out of proportion. I mean, for the crime of what?
The
Jacking
jo-
it?
the
Really
the
just
joke I used to have was like, of course he had to go to a theater to do that because all the furniture in his house talks.
no, no, no. Oh God.
If your
But
chair talks to you and your globe talks to
you
you and
know,
everything talks to you, you got no privacy.
but he also had to understand, fairly or unfairly, the risks that, doing something like that would entail. And this is kind of before, internet pornography, so
But it seems really, really random. He wasn't doing it
yeah,
in some park. Like, I get
I
it.
know.
He's in some park and there's kids playing nearby. I get arresting him
Right.
for sure.
Yeah.
But like in that environment, it's just like,
Yeah.
come on.
So I think, and he did have a fair amount of support. There were like support rallies, for him. There were people who sort of saw through it at the time, but otherwise, he became kind of the butt of jokes. He wasn't in movies. It was really, um,
People are
oh
making
God,
cherry jokes. That's what I'm talking
Cherry.
about. Like,
Someone
how you
said
supposed
Cherry decisively not interested in the assist. Oh
exactly. Give
Lord.
me a
Oh
break.
God. Behave.
Yeah.
Anyway, I should say that to myself. But in any case, so I think the fact that Venus was not just going retrograde, but it was conjunct Mars, probably reflects that, you know, the the break in social convention, or the scandal, that this erupted for him, was obviously really destructive to, his reputation and to his prospects. Now, what's interesting is through the 90s, he really took a break from movies, and he didn't really reappear in anything substantial until August of 1999.
Oh, he's in
That's when
the
Mystery
soup
Men.
Mystery Men. Yeah, he's so good in
Yeah.
that.
I
Yeah,
love that movie. I
me
love that.
too.
Like, I watched that over and over again with my brothers, and we quoted it all the time, and we
Yeah.
quoted actually his character a lot. And
I love that movie.
yeah, that the movie's really wild. I mean, it's got so many great actors in it too. It's
He
it's
was,
really
but
a big
in
deal.
between the arrest and that movie, he was also in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which might have come
All
out during
right.
the Red One of '93. Of course, it
Mhm.
was directed by Joss Whedon, who's a Red 3, a natal
Right.
Red 3. Um, but yeah, I want to let me double check. But he's in Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Yeah,
He's
that's
a
right.
vampire in that. But it's
So
true. Mystery Men is August of
it I
'99. I
so
remember
yeah,
that for
August of
sure.
1999, Venus goes retrograde in Virgo to Leo again, and I feel like that kind of represents his return, or at
For sure.
least his apparent return. There was, finally enough time had passed since this embarrassing incident from 1991, and he seemed to be back on a good path again. But then in November of 2001, he was he was raided by the
November
police, and then
2002, I think.
yeah, no, November 2001, and then a
Oh,
year
okay.
later in November 2002 is when he
Okay,
was
okay.
arrested.
That's
You
the chart
know,
I have. Right, right.
yeah, so it was about a year apart.
Okay.
And
Incidentally, Buffy the Vampire Slayer actually came out in July of '92, so it wasn't
okay,
during the Red One, but it must have been filmed like the previous year. This is what, like, when he was arrested. You remember he had long hair
right,
and a goatee, and that was
that's
part
right,
of the shock because wait a minute, Pee-wee's got short hair. Who is
right.
this dude? But in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, that's what he looks like. He's got long hair and a goatee, so he must have been
Mhm,
filming the movie around the time he was arrested. So he might have filmed
right.
that during the Red One.
So when he was dealing with the child porn charges, that was that was in the aftermath of that Venus retrograde in Scorpio from 2002, and really seemed to
Right.
derail again,
Yeah.
his chance of, being kind of back in good graces. And then in 2007, it's announced that like he's working on a new Pee-wee movie. I don't think it actually sort of happens in that
No.
time, and he's doing a lot of different projects in 2007, but there was like talk about him potentially coming back as Pee-wee. But it wasn't until 2015, during the Venus retrograde in Leo of 2015, that he was in the middle of filming the next, and now sadly the last, Pee-wee Herman movie, which came out the next year. And it's so funny because well, one, my kids, I'd never shown my kids Pee-wee Herman before or anything, but they saw the movie on Netflix, and they loved it even without me like kind of
Okay.
pushing it on them. They just gravitated naturally towards this character. And the movie is really adorable and really hilarious. And what I thought was so Venus retrograde about that movie is the fact that it basically shows the closest thing that Pee-wee Herman's character could experience to like a love story or a happy ending. I mean, for all intents and purposes, he is in love with Joe Manganiello's character. And I just thought that was so funny because Joe Manganiello is now back in the news again very recently due to his split from Sofia Vergara. Another one of these Venus retrograde and Leo breakups. But I just thought that was such a kind of oddly like sweet sort of return
Nice.
for Paul Rubens to have that return to this character during that Venus retrograde in Leo of 2015. And now that we're years on from that, he spent most of that time, dealing with cancer, and is now gone.
Yeah.
So it's maybe the 2007 one. Maybe there's like more there that I'm kind of missing, because there was like a Saturn conjunction to Venus as well in that time.
We deserve a good biography on the guy. Hopefully someone's going to write one. Or
Sure. So,
yeah.
So I think that obviously we can't account for like every single Venus event in his life, but I think even just looking at that one factor of Venus retrogrades in Leo, gives you kind of an interesting way to dazzling through the kind of major chapters of his life. And it's not immediately obvious why it would be the Venus retrogrades or the Venus retrograde in Leo especially that would be connected to his story. But
no, his natal sun's in Virgo, very close. Yeah. In those days, Venus was going retrograde in Virgo, close to his sun. So I think there's some reason to zero in on that. More so the red fives when they were in Virgo than Leo. Right. He's got the Pluto and the node in Leo, so it still accounts for it.
True.
I saw that you did. Since we're talking about movies, I saw that you saw Barbie.
Yes. Yeah, I did.
Have you seen Oppenheimer?
Not yet. No, okay. I haven't seen it yet. I would have done a double feature, but right. With three kids, it's kind of hard to squeeze
Spoiler here. The bomb goes off. Okay.
Wait, really?
Yeah. I don't want to ruin it for you, but the bomb does explode. I'm bringing this up because Chris and I did a casual podcast episode on the Barbie Oppenheimer thing last week, and this is for like the patron viewers. So if you're a subscriber to the astrology podcast, you've seen this. If you're not a subscriber, you have no idea that it happened, because that's what you're missing out on. Anyway, I'm bringing this up mostly because there was some research I did after we did the episode that was just so much more. That would have been so interesting to include on the episode, but Chris and I rushed to see the movies as quickly as possible so we could do the episode as quickly as possible and sort of catch that wave. But the problem with doing that is, of course, you don't give yourself enough time to research. And we both found stuff that we really wish we could have included in the episode and we hadn't. For those of you who want to see what Chris and I had to say, go ahead and sign up for that Patreon. You can access it. But I just wanted to show you guys, for those of you who have seen Oppenheimer, and I'm not, really spoiling anything.
Spoiler. Next, you're going to spoil Titanic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's that really was something we did when the movie came out. We'd walk by people lining up saying, "The boat sinks," you know. Um, that's the kind of um,
uh,
so um, just two events like for those of you who've seen the movie or who are going to see the movie. There's two events in the movie. These are the two things that really sort of undermine Oppenheimer when when eventually he has his security clearance revoked in 1953. It's specifically because of two suspicious things that happened in 1943 during the Red Five. Um, like first of all, even though he's married, he goes and sees an old girlfriend of his, Jean Tatlock, who's played by Florence Pugh. And it was on this day in June 14th, 43, as Venus was slowing down. It's not quite, it's almost at the red five. It's still in the black one, but it's gearing up there. And since she was a communist, a lifelong communist, the fact that he was visiting her and stayed the night with her in San Francisco while the Manhattan Project was going on, the Manhattan Project was a few months old at this point, it made it very suspicious. She wound up committing suicide a few months later, and that is sometimes viewed suspiciously, like she might
mm,
have been murdered by
the American
Boris.
government.
Yeah, the American government, and very likely the character in the movie played by Casey Affleck, Boris Pash, who, and this is the other event that happens in the movie. Casey Affleck's character, Boris Pash, interviews Oppenheimer, and Oppenheimer. The reason Pash is investigating Oppenheimer's is because the government knows that he went and spent the night with Jean Tatlock. And during this interview, Oppenheimer sort of kind of reveals, but he lies about it. He covers up, he reveals, but sort of he tells a half truth that gets him in a lot of trouble years later, 10 years later. A friend of his casually mentioned to him, over dinner, that there was this other scientist who could be a liaison with the Soviet Union to share nuclear secrets with. And Oppenheimer tells Pash that this is happening, but he doesn't name the friend of his who gave him this information, and kind of tells a little lie to half cover it up or whatever. And this gets him in a lot of trouble later on because actually the government knows exactly, all about that meeting and everything. So these are the two things that happened. And this interview with Boris Pash happens in August of 1943 while the Venus retrograde is happening, while we're in the red five. Okay. It's also kind of interesting, just like a side note, Casey Affleck is a red five. Boris Pash was a red three. But finally, there's one other event in here from the movie that's also a red five. It's not Oppenheimer's deal. It's Robert Downey Jr., the nemesis of the movie. He plays Louis Strauss. Who is Oppenheimer's enemy and, largely responsible for getting him in the trouble he did, or helping him get in the trouble he did. And in the movie culminates with Strauss. Strauss is not, he was nominated by President Eisenhower to be the Secretary of Commerce, and his nomination is denied by Senate by just a few votes because it's shown that he sort of interfered with Oppenheimer's dismissal in a sort of underhanded way. And actually, one of the dissenting votes was John F. Kennedy, which you find out in the movie. So I am kind of giving away the climax of the movie, although really it's not. I mean, it's the enjoyment of the movie doesn't rest on this conclusion. But this denial of the vote was also very, very close to the red five, just as they were going into the red five.
So yes, he didn't lose. He didn't lose his security clearance because he wanted to reveal the UFO secret. It was
no. That came either earlier or later. The
but yeah,
bomb was not dropped during a Venus retrograde. that part of the story is not the Venus retrograde, but so much of what Chris and I were talking about in the episode is so much of the important sort of action with regard to developing putting together Project Manhattan. Even though it happened a few months earlier than the Red Five, everything really sort of coalesced. Like everyone's like on site and on the, everyone who's important to the project is working it. But right away, it's not just Oppenheimer's security problems that are issues. There's like other people working there who also have dodgy security clearances. As it turns out, there is a spy there are a couple of spies on site, one of whom is Klaus Fuchs, who, later becomes this sort of public figure when he's revealed to be a Soviet spy. And he's the reason that the Soviet Union gets the bomb. So the Venus retrograde, the Red 5 Venus retrograde is really like all the controversy and all the tragedy involved in it, with regard to the lives of the scientists involved. All that stuff happens during that Venus retrograde. The later greater tragedy of the bomb actually dropping and killing tens or hundreds of thousands of people is something else.
Wasn't that at a Mars-Uranus conjunction in Gemini?
Yeah, Mars-Uranus quite close by. Yeah, there's a lot of Mars-Uranus in that story. Yeah.
Yeah, that meant, big explosion.
Yeah. Big things go boom.
Yeah, I mean, that's, Mars-Uranus for sure. Wow, you and the Pee-wee, you just been, much like Paul, ready and willing to whip it out.
Oh, good grief. Please. I know you are, but what am I?
I didn't see Oppenheimer yet, but I've loved, Christopher Nolan's movies, and I'll definitely see that as soon as I can. I gotta say though, this is like one of the first movies that that Nolan has released while Mars was not in Leo. It like just escaped Leo. Nolan himself was born with the Sun conjunct Mars in Leo,
right? 1970.
And he likes to release things while Mars in Leo.
Oh, good observation.
In fact, his last movie prior to this, Dunkirk, was released at a Sun Mars conjunction in Leo. So it was like a perfect, Sun Mars recurrence for him in Leo, and of course, it was a war film. So it's very appropriate. But what was I gonna say? But with Barbie, as we kind of discussed before when we talked about Venus retrograde through the houses, this is such a fantastic example of Venus going retrograde in someone's second house. Obviously, this can't apply, sadly, to every Cancer rising, but for Margot Robbie, who was born with Cancer rising, this is happening in a second house, as she not only already collected the largest payday for an actress last year for taking on the role to begin with, but because she is her production company that's leading it, she's earning all these residuals. And, she said as a joke to kind of get the movies made, she said, oh, this could make $1 billion. And it did just pass $1 billion and counting. So, her payday from this is really, astronomical.
No more ramen lunches for Margot.
Right. I mean, she's already doing pretty well prior to this, but this is really, just kicked it off. And then Greta Gerwig, the director and the writer,
Red 5, born on the Venus retrograde.
Born during. I mean, this is perfect, really. Yeah. And if you've seen the movie, then you'll know how perfect of a Venus retrograde movie this really is. It takes such a satirical view of and scathing at times, view of sort of and reversing gender roles and gender expectations and kind of really examining kind of the problem of patriarchy and the problems that creates for men and for women. And I thought, the fantastic performances, obviously just the the faithful attention to set design and the whole production design was absolutely incredible. And obviously Ryan Gosling and Margot Robbie did really fantastic performances there. Ryan Gosling especially seems to have been born to play Ken. he actually said, I read an interview apparently where Ryan Gosling said that when he was asked by Greta Gerwig to play Ken, he wasn't really sure about it, and he went outside and he happened to see a Ken doll in the dirt that had belonged to his daughter, just sitting
Okay.
there, and he took it as like this sign that he had to, he had to do this role. So he texted her back at that time and sent her the picture and saying like, all right, I'll do this. Um, and the what else is I going to say about it? Oh, and I don't know if you've read this article someone wrote about how basically the plot of
Oh, the
Barbie
Inanna
is
is
basically
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah,
Venusian
yeah, yeah.
Babylonian myth of Inanna.
Yeah, yeah. Chris and
Um,
I went into this on the podcast episode. Yeah, I mean it's so obvious, and this is the Chris, and maybe you can break the argument between us. Um, my
I
feeling was
haven't seen your episode yet, by the way.
okay. Well, my feeling was that it was like that was a really deliberate thing. Like in writing the screenplay, they were like, "Hey, let's take the myth of Inanna and write it as a script for the Barbie movie." Whereas Chris just thinks it's kind of like accidental, like they accidentally recreated the Inanna myth, while writing the script for Barbie. And I'm like, no, no, man, this is deliberate. So, yeah, as usual, Chris and I will find something to argue about, and that's the current one. What do you think?
I think that it would be really interesting to ask Greta Gerwig if she knows who Inanna is.
Yeah, I mean
um,
that
that would probably tell you.
yeah.
Uh, I
My
think
feeling.
it's good.
Oh, well, okay, no, no. I want to hear your thought, and then I'll tell you.
Oh, my thought is number one. I think astrologers tend to overestimate the degree to which people do things intentionally. Like when someone has chosen some crazy astrologically appropriate time to do something, astrologers will have a tendency to say, "Oh, who's their astrologer?" And it's um,
Right.
probably less likely that every person has a private astrologer, even if they're a wealthy person or whatever.
Or just because they happen to make really sensible or well-timed
Yeah.
decisions. Yeah.
A successful person is probably going to be naturally choosing more astrologically auspicious times. So I'm somewhat more reluctant to say that someone did something on purpose like that, for this reason. But on the other hand, I think that the hero's journey, the so-called monomyth, that Joseph Campbell uncovered, it exists because elements of that journey exist in so many
Well,
stories
sure,
across
sure.
the world, and so the
In the
the
same sense
Inanna
that
myth,
Lion King is Hamlet, is the
right?
story of Isis and Osiris, and
Exactly,
it's all
yeah,
the
and
same
so
story. Yeah.
yeah, every like Hollywood screenwriter, is aware of these underlying patterns and of stories, and so I would think even if Greta Gerwig and I believe her husband
No,
Noah Baumbach,
Baumbach, yeah.
yeah, the writers of the movie, I think even if they were just trying to follow the hero's journey for Barbie, that they probably would have made a somewhat similar kind of story. I mean, they followed several of the beats. One of the narrative points of the monomyth is that there's a refusal of the call. There's a rejection of the call to adventure, and we saw that take place in the Barbie movie where she's with the kind of shamanic weird Barbie, which is
Yeah,
hilariously hilarious idea and then hilariously portrayed by
yeah.
Kate McKinnon. I've actually heard that Mattel is now going to be selling
Weird
weird
Barbie,
Barbies.
of course, of
Yeah,
course.
yeah. So,
It reminds me of the
um,
early '90s when we had grunge fashion, like we just like
yeah,
we walked around in our torn jeans, and then suddenly like Gap is selling pre-torn jeans.
weird Barbie core, I
Yeah.
think, will be the new trend that Kate McKinnon has set off. So yeah, I love that. I love that character, and I love the her scenes. She's perpetually in the splits. Um,
Yeah,
with
that was
with
like
the drawn, yeah,
yeah,
I
yeah,
thought it
yeah.
was just great. But so she, at first she rejects that call, and I think that they even kind of played with that because she gives her this very like Morpheus like choice between going to
Right.
the real world or staying here, and she immediately chooses to stay there, and she's like, actually no, you're supposed to choose the cold adventure. Let's do that again.
You don't really have a choice.
Yeah. So yeah,
Well,
I think they must have been aware of that on that level, but the
I
fact that it
yeah.
ends up kind of being that it maps so perfectly into the Inanna myth. I mean, maybe they were aware of it. But they wouldn't have to be for it to
I'm not
still.
a big Joseph Campbell reader, but my understanding is that the myth of Inanna is central to like the fact that we have a hero's journey myth in the first place. So it's sort of you can't necessarily pry the two apart. My feeling about it all, I mean, this Chris's counter argument to what I'm about to say is like, look, it's cinema, so obviously they'll make cinematic references, but without wanting to spoil the movie for anyone, the movie opens with a 2001 motif with the Spake Zarathustra and the whole idea of like, the dolls that girls used to play with until Barbie came. And yeah, they recreate the cavemen in 2001 finding the object or whatever it is and discovering violence. They make this really clever reference to little girls finding Barbie with the music and all that. But then later in the movie, when they're in the real world and Ken and Barbie split up and Ken goes on his little journey through and discovers the patriarchy, while he's walking around, whatever, what are they in Chicago or LA, whatever they are,
Yeah.
he's walking around the city. Then there's suddenly like this sort of funk disco version of the Spake Zarathustra playing. And this is a reference to a different movie, Being There, by Hal Ashby, Peter Sellers' last movie. This is a movie about white privilege, and there's this great scene where, I'm not going to go into too much detail. You have to see Being There to understand. But there's a scene where Peter Sellers his character is walking through the streets of like burnt out DC and sort of seeing the world for the first time, very much like Ken in Barbie. And it's to that same funk disco version of Thus Spake Zarathustra. So Hal Ashby's making a reference in Being There to 2001 and the two different versions of that music. And then Barbie is like making references to both movies and tying in this theme. It's like very like 3D chess going on here.
Yeah.
In terms of like clever sort of like you have to be like the cinephile. I mean, everyone got the 2001
Yeah.
thing. I mean,
Yeah.
everyone gets that. But then to have the Being There music and the way like she's sort of unified this like one cinematic homage to another movie and at the same time
Yeah.
making an homage to both.
Greta Gerwig is really excellent.
Yeah,
She
no,
has
it's
done a
very
fantastic job with this. Like,
it's
it's
very
just amazing.
it's very clever filmmaking, and I'm just thinking like, yeah, if they're thinking on that sort of 3D chess level, conceptually, then there's no way they don't know about the myth of Anana. Like
Well, but like, all right, but the
I'm
fact,
prepared to be proven wrong. Someone should ask her, but
but
I find it.
yeah, no, I would love
I'm
to
just
ask her.
astounded. Because I'm an astrologer, I know it's possible that she did just
Well, and she
rewrite the
is
myth of Anana as if it
in,
never existed.
well, but
It's
importantly,
really hard to imagine.
she was the right person to tell this story. She was
Oh
like,
yeah.
well, she was because she also comes from the Venus retrograde cycle, that she would kind of bring
Yes.
her own sort of essence. She would, I think that's the part that couldn't be planned. That's the part that couldn't have been
Agreed.
contrived. No
Agreed.
one could control her birth date, so the fact that it just happened to and this is all the more remarkable when you think about just the length of the production schedules in these types of movies, and the fact that this movie had actually gone through a couple of hands prior to finally becoming her project. So it makes it all the more sort of unremarkable, or rather very
Remarkable.
remarkable.
Very
Yeah,
remarkable.
very remarkable that it happened in this particular way, so that this Venus retrograde in Leo person from 1983 makes this incredible work of art in the Venus retrograde in Leo of 2023.
Indeed.
Um so Yeah, my kids really liked it too. You know, they
Good,
obviously
good.
didn't get many of the references. We're gonna have to show them 2001: Space Odyssey at some point. But
Right. Yeah, no, I
but
mean, I saw some people freaking out that like, how could, first of all, it's not a kids movie. Although I would take I have a 12-year-old daughter. I would easily, excuse me.
they enjoyed the things that they enjoyed
Yeah.
about it. You know, that different people can enjoy it at different levels, and so my
Yeah.
kids kind of liked it at the
Yeah.
level that they did, and
I mean,
I
people are
liked it at a
like,
high
because
level.
there's a joke, like, to use there's a joke where characters are, offering to pee-wee each other.
To have a beach off.
Beach
Yeah.
off. There's this little pun. It takes, it's a string of jokes that goes on for about 20-30 seconds, and people are like, how can you show that to kids? And I'm like, come on, kids, like, either the kid
It
is
went over
old
their
enough to
heads
get the joke, or
anyway.
it just goes over their heads. And what's going to happen is 10 years from now, they'll like, oh, now I get the joke, kind of,
Right.
yeah.
Um, yeah, I thought it was great. I mean, it's also been kind of funny seeing, the usual suspects, freak out about this movie, and
Oh, yeah, yeah.
it's
Pinheiro
commentary
gave a
on patriarchy.
45-minute review, this whole performative thing, and then predicting that it was going to fail, which is just hilarious.
That's just hilarious. Well, what I also thought was really funny is I think what you're talking about is Mr. Shapiro, that he went. I saw a picture he took of himself in front of the Barbie poster
Right,
wearing all black. Kind of obviously it's like some sort of protest against the movie's very pink,
right,
nature. Only, but not realizing that actually the Kens do wear all black in one scene. So it kind of looks like
right.
he's dressing up for the movie,
Look,
unintentionally.
all my clothes are black or gray, so I went in black and gray, but it wasn't at a pros. The funniest thing was the theater that I saw it in. There's this theater near me in Vancouver where there's a bar, so you can actually buy drinks and drink your drink while watching the movie. So I got myself a beer. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going to watch a movie. But I was just like, I was the only man possibly in the theater, definitely in my row. And if you've seen the movie, like, okay, you're a man, like, you're already kind of an interloper. You're a man with a beer. You're just like dude, like, you are in the movie. You are one of the Kens. So yeah, I felt like quite the Ken in there with my beer. But thankfully, everyone was kind enough to ignore me.
Yeah, I think it's just probably will be one of the most compelling and perfect examples of a Venus retrograde and Leo movie possible. I mean, it is really the ultimate kind of Venus retrograde and Leo sort of statement.
Yeah,
And
indeed.
well, yeah, he's Knuff. Yeah, I love that. And it's funny, people characterizing it as an anti-man movie are all wrong. I think it sort of, it's obviously a very pro like woman movie, but I think it's an anti-patriarchy movie. It shows, I mean,
Yeah.
because Ken buys the lie. Ken buys the lie. He thinks
Yeah, he's
he
going around, he's trying to get a job.
he's,
Like,
you
I
know
want a job as a doctor. I'm a man.
yeah, exactly. Give me a clicky pen and a sharp thing, like security. Yeah, he's bought this lie, and he's not happy, for having power. He still just wants Barbie's love, and he's got to, learn how to be okay with himself. And that's actually, I think, providing a really kind of nuanced and
Yeah.
healthy sort of answer in some ways to how, or observation that patriarchy harms men as well, um
I
just in a different way.
I think I find these complaints to be so bogus. It's like complaining that there's too many car chases in Gone in 60 Seconds or whatever. Like, it's like like
Yeah, I mean, it's the Barbie movie.
it's
Like,
the
come
Barbie
on.
movie, of course. Yeah. It's just a lot of silliness. It's a good fun movie. It's not a great movie, but it's a good fun movie. And yeah, I laughed quite a bit despite being on my own. It's funny if you're alone in the theater, and possibly the only man in the theater, and you're laughing
Yeah,
out loud because it's funny.
yeah, you don't do a Paul Rubens in the movie theater. That's
Oh
all.
God.
It's just
Really, really, what, really,
no
really?
one no one should do that. uh Anyway, so
Anyway,
we have a few more minutes left. Is there anything else you
um,
want to touch on?
no, I'm good. I should sign off about early. I have a client coming up that I need to prepare
Okay,
for. But
alrighty.
I am so happy you are back, Watson.
Oh,
I mean,
well, I'll
I'm
stick
sorry.
around.
I really am sorry for Beth and the kids and what they're going through. I know it's not the same for you, but I'm sorry your family's going through this.
Sure, thank you.
And obviously we all understand why you couldn't be here, but I'm really thrilled that you're back. I'm
Oh,
really thrilled.
oh, thanks. I'm happy to
And
be back.
yeah, let's dig into more of this Heliacal Rising and setting question in future live streams. I think people really dug that. I know I'm still my head's spinning uh, for everything we're uncovering.
I'm just looking up the name of the person who said that they might be able to help.
Oh, that was Fortunamo, wasn't it? I think it was Fortunamu.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Do you have that email address?
I think so. Um,
You said we had the email.
yeah. Fortunamu, shoot me another email just to remind me of how I find you. I know who you are, but then these screen names that we have, it's easy to forget who you're talking to. So yeah, send us that email and we can proceed with that. All right, Watson. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Who are you, Watson? Where do we find you?
I'm an astrologer, and I am available for consultations, tutoring, horary, rectifications, electionals, pretty much anything you need. I can be kind of your personal astrologer. And you can find me at my website, patrickwatsonAstrology.com.
Fantastic. Well worth it. I'm also a consulting astrologer. You can find me at nickdaganbestastrologer.com. Available for consultations. I do, electionals, rectifications. I don't do horary so much. So, find someone else for your horary. I mean, I know how to do it, but I don't do it very much. So you best go with someone experienced. But everything else I do, and I love it. And I love meeting new clients. I love, every new chart is a new joy for me. So also available for your astrological needs. Either way, you can't go wrong with Patrick, with myself. So yeah, without further ado, have yourselves a fantastic week. Thank you again, Patrick, and we'll see you next Sunday.
See ya.
All right. Bye, everyone.